Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on the top political stories of the day. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. The regulations from the Executive and Need of Scrutiny Act, more commonly referred to by its acronym, the REINS Act, is a bill that could cause major changes to the federal rulemaking process if it passes into law. So basically, it would require legislative approval of agency regulations with certain financial or economic impacts before the regulations become effective. But what's that process look like currently, and what are the arguments for and against changing how it works? To go over all of this and more, I'm joined by Ballotpedia staff writer Molly Byrne for our latest breakdown of the administrative state. Molly, welcome to On the Ballot.
Hi, Victoria. Thanks for having me.
Very excited to have you on today. So this will be old news by the time this episode airs, but did you catch the solar eclipse this past week?
I did a bit. It was very cloudy where I live, unfortunately. So I'm sure it wasn't to the extent it was in some other places of the country, but still very cool. Did you get to see it?
Yeah, it sounds like cloudiness was a theme across the country for a lot of places that got to experience it. I'm here in Dallas, which was one of the places that had totality, but and luckily the clouds
very
did,
cool.
Yeah, it was amazing to witness. And luckily the clouds did part just in time for us to witness it. But
nice.
Yeah, great moment in history. Kind of like this moment we're going to talk about right now, the REINS Act. From what I understand, this law has kind of been bouncing around in different iterations at the federal level since 2009. Can you tell us a little bit more about its history?
Yeah, so the REINS Act, which, like you mentioned, stands for the Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act, is a legislative proposal that's been introduced in every Congress since the 111th Congress back in 2009. So it was first designed by Lloyd Rogers, who was an activist for the Tea Party, and was then proposed by a Republican congressman named Jeff Davis. So between the years of 2011 and 2017, the House of Representatives passed every version of this bill. But then we had a few years where there was really no action on it until the current version, which we're currently in the 118th Congress. And we did see the REINS Act passed in the House in June of last year.
It's kind of crazy when you think 2009, you think, oh, that's not that long ago, but it's 15 years and this thing is still in the process of getting passed. So currently the federal REINS Act is waiting to be voted on in the Senate. Congresswoman Kat Cammack, a Republican from Florida, introduced the REINS Act as H.R. 277, like you said, in the 118th Congress. And the House approved it by a vote of 221 to 210 on June 14th. So Molly, what would the REINS Act do in practice if it gets passed in the Senate?
So the REINS Act is a legislative proposal that, if passed, would amend the Congressional Review Act, which is often referred to as the CRA. So under the CRA, Congress has the authority to issue resolutions of disapproval to nullify certain agency regulations that it considers to be harmful. So the REINS Act aims to expand the CRA to require congressional approval of agency regulations that carry certain financial or economic impacts before those regulations become effective. So rather than issuing resolutions of disapproval after a rule takes effect, the REINS Act, if passed, would give Congress preemptive authority to halt the enactment of certain regulations.
Got it. And is there any indication that the Senate is going to pass this anytime soon?
So we can't know for sure if the Senate will vote on the bill anytime soon, but there hasn't been any action on the REINS Act in the Senate since it was placed on the legislative calendar in June of last year. But the Senate hasn't acted on the REINS Act in any of the years that it's been introduced, with the exception of a version that was passed out of committee in the Senate during the 115th Congress.
Interesting. Are there any state equivalents for the REINS Act?
Yeah, there are state equivalents. So we refer to these as REINS-style state laws, which are basically state laws that are enacted in the spirit of the federal REINS Act. So there are two that have been enacted, one in Wisconsin and one in Florida, which are pretty similar in that they both increase legislative oversight of administrative agency rulemaking, but they do differ in some ways. So the Wisconsin REINS Act, which is also referred to as 2017 Wisconsin Act 57, requires state legislative authorization of administrative rules that carry compliance and implementation costs of $10 million or more over a 2-year period. And then in Florida, there's a REINS-style state law that was enacted in 2010 to amend the state's Administrative Procedure Act to require legislative approval of agency rules that have associated costs of $1 million or more over a 5-year period. So you can see the bills are a bit different in some of their provisions, but they were both enacted to achieve similar goals related to the federal REINS Act.
And I'm guessing since this is sponsored at the federal level by a Republican, the state ones are also sponsored by Republicans or passed by Republican majorities in Wisconsin? Yeah. Okay, got it. And are there any other states that are trying to replicate Florida and Wisconsin's success in getting these acts passed?
Yeah, there have been states that have tried to implement similar bills. As of right now, we're not aware of any others that have been enacted. But for example, there was a bill in Arizona last year that would have required the state legislature to ratify any state agency rule that had estimated regulatory costs of $500,000 or more within a 5-year period. So that bill was vetoed by Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs in May of last year. But yes, other states have tried to enact similar bills.
Got it. Let's turn our attention to the pro and con arguments for this act. So what's the primary argument in favor of the REINS Act?
So the primary argument in support of the REINS Act is that it would restore the separation of powers by making elected representatives accountable for regulatory decisions. There are also supporting arguments that the REINS Act would increase transparency and accountability in the rulemaking process by authorizing Congress to approve of major regulatory policy decisions.
And then on the opposite side, why do opponents of the REINS Act think it's a bad idea?
So the arguments in opposition to the REINS Act argue that federal agencies are charged with the authority to enact regulations based on their expertise, and that this proposed legislation would undermine that process. Opponents also argue that the REINS Act would make it more difficult to enact regulations by delaying the process and turning to Congress to make these highly technical regulatory decisions that they may not be equipped to make.
Got it. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you for coming on the show, as always, and breaking down these really complicated administrative state policies.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about the REINS Act in the link in our show notes. We'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.